Hello, my friend. I hope you're doing well today. In this channel, we learn English through gentle historical stories, simple ideas, and meaningful moments. So take a breath, relax, and let's begin. Imagine being only 20 years old and suddenly being told that a kingdom now belongs to you. Not a quiet kingdom, not a peaceful one, a kingdom full of soldiers, proud cities, old enemies, and dangerous expectations. Most people at that age are still trying to understand who they are, but Alexander was asked to become a king, a commander, and a symbol almost overnight. And somehow, he did more than simply survive that moment. In just over a decade, he marched farther than almost anyone in the ancient Greek world had ever imagined. He crossed rivers, deserts, and mountains. He defeated armies that looked impossible to defeat. He built cities, changed trade, spread ideas, and left behind a name that still echoes after more than 2,000 years. But Alexander's story is not only about victory, it is also a story about hunger, about destiny, about loneliness, about what happens when someone begins to believe that ordinary limits no longer apply to him. And maybe that is why his story still feels alive today. Because when we listen closely, we do not hear only the noise of battles. We hear the quieter questions underneath them. What makes a person chase greatness so fiercely? What does ambition give us? And what does it take away? If you're ready to step into this story with me, comment, "Ready." Alexander was born in 356 BCE in Pella, the capital of Macedon. His father was Philip II, a brilliant king and military reformer. His mother was Olympias, a woman of deep belief, strong emotion, and fierce imagination. From the very beginning, Alexander grew up in a world where power and myth lived side by side. His father gave him a kingdom growing stronger every year. His mother gave him something less visible, but perhaps just as powerful. She filled his mind with stories of gods, heroes, and destiny. She told him of Achilles, the warrior of the Iliad. She told him that greatness was not a dream for other people. It was something close, something personal, something that might already be waiting inside him. When Alexander was still a boy, one moment revealed the kind of mind he had. Philip had bought a magnificent horse, wild and difficult, too fierce for anyone to control. The men around the king tried and failed. They saw only danger. But Alexander watched more carefully. He noticed that the horse was frightened by its own shadow. So he turned the animal toward the sun, where the shadow would fall behind it. Then he calmed it, mounted it, and rode. The horse was Bucephalus. That moment became legendary, not only because it was dramatic, but because it seemed to reveal something essential about Alexander. He was bold, yes, but he was also observant. He liked action, but he first tried to see what others had missed. As he grew older, his education became even more remarkable. From about age 13 to 16, he studied under Aristotle, one of the greatest thinkers in history. Under him, Alexander learned about literature, science, medicine, politics, ethics, and philosophy. He admired Homer deeply, especially the Iliad. He wanted not only to live, but to live memorably. He did not want an ordinary life. He wanted a life that would be spoken of long after he was gone. As a teenager, Alexander was already being tested by the real world. While Philip campaigned elsewhere, Alexander was left with real responsibility in Macedon. He acted against rebellion, proved he could command men, and showed that he was more than a prince waiting for adulthood to begin. Then, at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, he fought beside his father against a coalition of Greek city-states. He was still very young, but he was already seeing the shape of war from inside it. So by the time he reached adulthood, Alexander was not an untested dreamer. He knew court politics. He knew battlefield fear. He knew what it meant to be watched by others, measured against his father, and expected to become something extraordinary. Then, in 336 BCE, everything changed. Philip II was assassinated. The death was sudden, public, and destabilizing. And in an instant, Alexander became king at the age of 20. But a crown did not make him safe. In fact, it made him vulnerable. Rivals could challenge him. Greek cities could rebel. Neighboring tribes could test his weakness. There are moments in history when a young ruler is given time to learn. Alexander was not given that gift. He had to prove himself immediately. And he did. He moved quickly to secure power in Macedon and reassert control in Greece. Some cities submitted, but Thebes rebelled. Alexander answered with terrible force. The city was destroyed, and the message was clear to everyone watching. The young king was not weak, not temporary, and not afraid to be ruthless. This is one of the first places in his story where admiration and discomfort begin to live together. Now, Alexander stood where his father had long intended to stand, at the edge of a greater dream. Philip had prepared to campaign against the Persian Empire, the largest and richest empire in the known world. Alexander inherited not only the throne, but that unfinished ambition. In 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia with an army that was disciplined, loyal, and far smaller than the full force Persia could eventually gather. This was the beginning of the campaign that would define his life. The crossing was not just practical, it was symbolic. Alexander was stepping into lands tied to old Greek memory, old wars, old humiliation, and old desire. He was young, hungry, and convinced that destiny was calling him forward. The first major test came at the Granicus River. Persian forces waited on the opposite bank. River battles are dangerous. Water slows soldiers, breaks formations, and leaves men exposed. Even Alexander's position was risky, but he attacked anyway. The fighting was fierce. At one point, Alexander came close to death. Ancient accounts say a companion saved him in the chaos. But the result was clear. He won. And with that victory, the western edge of Asia Minor began to open before him. From there, Alexander did not simply race east in blind excitement. He moved with purpose. He secured cities, weakened Persian control along the coast, and fought not just bravely, but intelligently. This matters because Alexander is often remembered as a heroic rider charging into danger, and he was that. But he was also a planner. His victories were not built on courage alone. They were built on discipline, coordination, and military structure. At Gordium, another story joined his growing legend. There was said to be a famous knot, impossibly tangled, with a prophecy that the man who solved it would rule Asia. The most famous version says Alexander did not untie it at all. He simply cut through it with his sword. Whether every detail happened exactly that way is still debated, but the story survived because it fit him perfectly. When ordinary methods failed, Alexander made his own path. Soon after came one of the great turning points of his life, the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. There, Alexander faced Darius III, king of Persia himself. This was no longer a border conflict. This was a contest between rulers. Darius had greater numbers, but the terrain narrowed the battlefield and reduced that advantage. Alexander saw the opportunity and used it. He struck with precision and force. The Persian line broke. Darius fled. His family was left behind and fell into Alexander's hands. What Alexander did next is one of the most revealing moments in his story. He treated Darius's family with respect. In a world where humiliation of defeated royalty could be severe, that choice mattered. It showed humanity, but it also showed political intelligence. Alexander understood that conquest is not only about defeating an enemy, it is also about presenting yourself as worthy of ruling what you take. After Issus, he could have rushed straight after Darius. Instead, he turned south, continuing to secure the coast. Once again, we see the pattern. Alexander could be dramatic, but he was not careless in every decision. Sometimes empires are won not only by charging at the center, but by removing support piece by piece. Then his journey brought him into Egypt, and the tone of the story changed. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed less as an invader and more as a liberator. Persian rule had been deeply unpopular, and many Egyptians saw him as the beginning of something new. He was recognized as pharaoh. He entered an older and deeper world, one filled with temples, symbols, desert light, and ancient sacred traditions. During this time, he visited the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, a place surrounded by mystery. What was said there is still uncertain. Ancient writers tell the story in different ways, but later tradition strongly connects this moment with Alexander's growing sense that he was more than an ordinary king, perhaps even touched by the divine. Whether the oracle transformed him or only confirmed what he already wanted to believe, it strengthened something dangerous and powerful inside him, the feeling that his life was not bounded by ordinary human expectation. While in Egypt, he founded Alexandria, a city that would become one of the great centers of learning and culture in the ancient world. This matters because Alexander did not only destroy, he also built. He planted names, institutions, and roads of connection. He helped create the conditions for a wider cultural world that would outlast him. And yet, even as he built, he kept looking east. He had not come this far to stop. If this part of the story makes you feel both admiration and caution at the same time, comment A for admiration or B for both. In 331 BCE, Alexander marched toward the heart of the Persian Empire once again. Darius gathered another vast army and chose the field near Gaugamela carefully. The open ground was meant to favor Persian numbers, cavalry, and chariots. It should have been the place where Persia recovered its strength. Instead, it became the place where its fate was sealed. Before the battle, Alexander studied the land. He watched carefully. He prepared. He did not rush because of emotion alone. He understood that one wrong move against a larger force could destroy everything. When the battle began, the Persians attacked with enormous energy. Chariots rushed forward. Men moved under dust, shouting metal, fear, and speed. But Alexander's army held its shape. And then, at the critical moment, he saw the opening he needed. He struck hard, leading a decisive cavalry charge. He drove toward the weakness in the Persian line and once again pushed the battle in the direction of Darius himself. And once again, Darius fled. That image would define Alexander's legend for centuries. The young king pressing forward while the ruler of Persia turned away. After Gaugamela, the Persian Empire was effectively finished as a ruling power. Alexander entered Babylon, then Susa, then Persepolis. He now possessed the centers of Persian wealth and kingship. The world he had inherited as a young ruler was gone. A new world was opening under his feet. At Persepolis, one of the most symbolic moments of Alexander's life took place. Parts of the royal palace were burned. Ancient writers explain it in different ways. Some describe it as revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece generations earlier. Others suggest it happened during a night of drinking and excess. Some modern historians see it as a complicated political act, both emotional and theatrical. Whatever the exact motive, the flames became symbolic. They marked triumph, destruction, memory, and transformation all at once. In that fire, it felt as though one great empire was ending, while another announced itself. At this point, many rulers would have stopped. They would have settled their new lands, secured their capitals, enjoyed their treasure, and ruled from a place of victory. Alexander did not stop. This is one of the keys to understanding him. Success did not calm him. It moved the horizon farther away. The more he conquered, the less it seemed enough. He continued east into Central Asia, through difficult lands that demanded not only military skill, but endurance, patience, and relentless will. He founded more cities. He fought resistance. He remained in motion. And as he moved farther east, something else changed. He was no longer simply a Macedonian king conquering foreign lands. He was trying to hold together a huge and diverse imperial world. He adopted some Persian customs. He included local elites. He began imagining rule on a scale larger than what many of his own companions were comfortable with. To some, This was vision. To others, it was betrayal. The farther Alexander moved, the more complex his empire became. His soldiers had followed him from Macedon through Asia Minor, through Syria, through Egypt, through Persia, and beyond. They had fought for years. They had crossed climates, languages, and landscapes that must have felt almost unreal compared with home. But Alexander kept going. By 327 BCE, he had crossed the Hindu Kush and advanced toward the Indian subcontinent. To him, the edge of the world still seemed to lie somewhere ahead, always just beyond the next river, the next mountain, the next kingdom. That kind of ambition can be inspiring from a distance. From up close, it can be exhausting. Still, Alexander believed movement itself was part of greatness. Stopping too soon may have felt, to him, like shrinking. Then came the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BCE against King Porus. This battle was unlike what Alexander had faced before. There was rain, mud, difficult river movement, and war elephants. The battlefield was unfamiliar, intimidating, and unstable. Yet Alexander adapted, as he so often did. He crossed the river with deception and skill, engaged the enemy, and won. But what makes this scene memorable is not only the victory, it is what happened after. Alexander was impressed by Porus's courage and dignity. Instead of humiliating him completely, he allowed Porus to remain a ruler under his authority. Even in conquest, Alexander admired strength when he saw it in another man. That says something important about him. He wanted submission, yes, but he also respected courage, even when it stood against him. And then, at last, Alexander met something that could not be defeated by bravery or strategy alone. He met the exhaustion of his own army. At the Hyphasis River, his men refused to go farther. They had marched for years. They were far from home. They were tired in body, spirit, and memory. Alexander wanted to continue. He still believed there was more world to claim, more history to make, more destiny to fulfill. But his soldiers said no. For a man who had bent so much of the world around his will, this was one of the rarest moments of his life. Desire met a wall it could not break. Ancient tradition says he withdrew into anger and silence. He could not easily accept that limits had finally arrived. Yet, in the end, he had to listen. This was not a battle he could win with a charge, a speech, or a vision. So he agreed to turn back, and maybe there is something deeply human in that moment. Not the invincible conqueror on a horse, not the brilliant king entering captured cities, but a man sitting with disappointment, forced to recognize that even the strongest leader still depends on the hearts and bodies of others. Alexander had conquered nations, but he could not conquer weariness. The return journey was not gentle. Part of the army crossed the Gedrosian Desert, one of the harshest stretches of the entire campaign. Heat, thirst, fatigue, and poor conditions killed many. By then, the cost of greatness could no longer hide behind the shine of victory. Empire had been built, yes, but it had also been paid for in suffering. This part of the story matters because it changes the emotional color of everything that came before it. When we hear about conquests from far away, history can sound clean. It can sound like names, maps, and victories. But inside those victories were real bodies, real exhaustion, and real grief. Eventually, Alexander returned to Babylon. There, he did not settle into quiet rest. He was still planning, still organizing, still imagining what might come next. Arabia may have been one more dream ahead of him. Administrative reforms, ceremonies, political arrangements, cultural integration, future campaigns, all of these still moved around him. His life had gained such momentum that stillness may have felt unnatural. Perhaps he no longer knew how to live without the next horizon. And then, suddenly, the body that had carried all that momentum began to fail. He became ill. At first, it may not have seemed final, but the fever worsened. Day by day, The man who had crossed continents grew weaker in Babylon. In 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon. He was only 32 years old. The exact cause remains uncertain. Over the centuries, people have suggested malaria, typhoid, poisoning, and other possibilities. But history keeps its silence on that final medical answer. What it does preserve clearly is the shock. For those around him, this must have felt impossible. How could someone who moved with such force simply stop? How could a man who had outrun kingdoms be undone by sickness? Traditions say his soldiers were devastated. This was the man they had followed across impossible distances, the man whose confidence often became their courage, the man who seemed built for motion, action, and continuation. And now he lay still in Babylon, beyond command, beyond victory, beyond the next campaign. There is something deeply moving in that contrast. A man who defeated armies could not defeat fever. A man who reached toward immortality entered the same silence every human life must one day enter. That is part of what makes his story feel both grand and fragile at the same time. For all his brilliance, all his victories, and all his reach, Alexander could not escape the oldest truth in the world. Life is brief. Even for the extraordinary, after Alexander's death, his empire did not remain whole. His generals fought over it, dividing it into separate kingdoms. In that sense, he did not leave behind a stable single empire that could long survive him. But that is not the whole story. His influence did survive. Greek language, art, thought, political forms, and cultural habits spread across a much wider world. Cities he founded became important centers of trade and learning. The Hellenistic age that followed was shaped deeply by the paths he opened. So how should we remember him? Was he a hero, a visionary, a destroyer, a brilliant young ruler consumed by ambition? The honest answer is that Alexander does not fit neatly into one sentence. He was courageous, and he was ruthless. He was intellectually curious, and he was dangerously ambitious. He could show respect, and he could unleash devastation. He expanded cultural contact across regions, yet he also carried the violence of empire wherever he went. That complexity is part of why his story still matters. Simple stories fade quickly, complicated ones remain. And maybe this is where the story becomes quietly personal. Most of us will never lead armies or rule cities. But many of us know what it feels like to chase something with all our strength, to want more, to fear being ordinary, to wonder whether success will finally quiet the restless place inside us. Alexander's life does not give us an easy answer, but it does give us a mirror. His story suggests that ambition can open worlds. It can pull us beyond fear. It can help us attempt what others think is impossible. But his story also warns us that ambition alone does not tell us where enough is. If there is no inner boundary, then every victory becomes only the beginning of another hunger. If there is no wisdom beside courage, then power can become its own prison. And if there is no tenderness in the way we measure greatness, we may forget to ask what our triumph costs the people walking beside us. This is why Alexander's life still reaches us after so many centuries. Not because he was perfect, not because he was easy to admire, but because he lived at full intensity, and in doing so, he revealed both the beauty and the danger inside human ambition. He reminds us that a person can carry vision and contradiction in the same heart. He reminds us that extraordinary ability does not erase human weakness. He reminds us that the desire to become unforgettable can create wonders and also leave wounds. So perhaps we can leave Alexander where history leaves him, not only in glory, not only in tragedy, but somewhere in between. A brilliant young king, a restless soul, a conqueror of vast lands, a student of Homer, a son shaped by both a father's ambition and a mother's fierce imagination. A leader who could inspire devotion and fear in the same breath. From Pella to Babylon, his journey was astonishing. And yet the end of that journey returns us to the same quiet truth waiting for all of us. Life is short. power passes, and what remains is not only what we built, but what we awakened in others. If you'd like another gentle history story in simple English, comment next. Maybe that is why people still say his name, not only because he conquered, but because he made the human desire for greatness impossible to ignore. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope this story made your English learning feel a little lighter and a little easier. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and stay with me on this journey. And if there's a story or topic you'd like to hear next, leave it in the comments. I'd love to make more videos for you. Take care, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next story.